If an owner comes with a request to create a board, the first thing to do is to dissuade them from it.
There are still many stereotypes. For example, a board of directors are these gray cardinals who make decisions on behalf of the owner and the entire company.
During a crisis, a board is even more effective in supporting the company, in preventing it from going bankrupt.
Many people say there should be chemistry between the owners of the board and the board members. What does that mean?
It doesn't mean that all board members have to share the same opinion. No.
Board members should work not for money, but for the benefit of the company.
We will propose to the owner that we work free of charge.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Sergiy Bulavin. You are now watching Boards of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin, a channel where we explore topics related to boards of directors, advisory and supervisory boards, as well as careers in these boards. Today our guest is Dmytro Kozlov. Greetings to everyone. Dmytro is an active member and chairperson of the boards of various companies. Today, Dmytro and I will discuss the topic of building a career on boards of directors. Dmytro, before you got involved with boards, you had an executive career. You worked in global world-class companies as a chief information officer, including in the banking sector. But what made you turn your attention to boards of directors and move away from an executive career toward a non-executive path?
Thank you, Sergiy. Actually, it happened almost by chance because at a certain tactical moment, due to some specific circumstances, I left the company I was working for. And after some time, when my personal circumstances, let's say, changed, I started thinking about what to do next. A friend of mine at the time said, "Oh, by the way, have you ever paid attention to such a tool as advisory or supervisory boards?" Well, to be honest, I had never paid attention to it. I was never interested because, as you said, I was working as a chief information officer, and in general, probably, had never thought in that direction. But I started reading, started figuring out what it actually is. It caught my interest. First and foremost, I was curious about why this variety of companies. You have the opportunity to work with different companies, you have the chance to be involved with these different companies across various industries. And that's much more interesting than working at the same company year after year and so on. And it was my friend who found it and said, "Here it is. This Ukrainian Corporate Governance Academy, which offers training, launched a course. It was the second group, I believe, for training corporate directors. And I, thought it over and decided I should go. It wouldn't hurt. Additional knowledge is, of course, an investment in yourself. So I went there. That's where you and I met, and I'm really glad about that. So, for me, it was really meaningful. Great training, very interesting. And, then I decided that my main job would be related to supervisory or advisory boards.
In your opinion, how much does the experience you gained during your executive career, including experience related to information systems, digitalization, and digital transformation, help you now in your work on the board of directors?
Yes, it does help. By the way, it was actually one of the triggers that convinced me to join the supervisory board, because digitalization was already in full swing. And from what I had read about supervisory boards, all companies were in need of competencies such as IT experience, experience in implementation, experience in digitalization, business process automation, and the deployment of large or small systems. And now we have AI, and we have to work with it, and it needs to be implemented. And I would say that IT experience is a necessary competency for any board.
If we talk about experience in digitalization and digital transformation, how much is it in demand right now? Is it really not just hype or a trend in private companies, but something that truly brings value?
Most companies have taken certain steps toward digitalization, starting with small examples, such as the implementation of ERP systems. What is 1C? It's essentially an ERP system, a small one for a small company, with features that are incomparable, for example, to large systems like SAP and others. But it's already the beginning of digitalization or optimization of certain business processes. And now we understand that without transitioning to digital, documents, business processes, maybe not all of them, it depends on the company, the scale, the industry, and so on, but it's impossible to move forward without it.
Well, it's quite a broad topic, and if you don't mind, let's have a separate conversation about digitalization, digital transformation, the use of AI. But for now, let's get back to your career. You made the decision, graduated from UCJ, and after that found your first job. How did that happen?
Well, it wasn't all that simple, because yes, we graduated from UCJ, and I thought that now I was so talented professional with all this experience and so on. I expected everyone to come running and say, "Oh, Dmytro, we've been waiting our whole lives for you to join our board." I was sending out CVs, I was looking for various options. Well, there were some options, but first of all, for some reason, well, not for some reason, I was told it would be easier. I started looking for board positions in foreign companies, big ones, small ones, abroad. But I realized that as talented as me, but there are far fewer board positions. It took about 2 years to get onto the first board. And those 2 years, well, okay, maybe 2 years, I don't know. If it had taken longer, would I have lost the motivation to keep searching or not? But now I realize that 2 years isn't that long if we're talking about those who are planning to work on boards need to understand that it takes time before you find your first board. And to start, if you can't find, as they say, paid gigs, a paid board position, then start with boards of charitable foundations or charitable organizations.
Well, and most likely it was the board of a private company, not a state-owned one. Although at the time you graduated from UCJ, there were a lot of offers from state-owned companies that were looking for supervisory board members to join the supervisory boards.
Yes. If we're talking about private companies, there's no politics involved. If we're talking about state-owned companies, there is politics involved. So for those who enjoy playing political games, they'll probably feel comfortable in state-owned companies. But private companies, in my opinion, are much more inspiring and interesting.
Speaking of private company boards, how many have you been on exactly so far?
4 private companies where, yes, I've worked as a member or chair of the board. By the way, I was on the supervisory board.
Many colleagues say that when they join a board of a private company, they usually find that in reality, it's not just one business, but several businesses. And in fact, one board starts functioning as several boards for each of the businesses. Did you just count the number of businesses or the number of companies?
The number of companies, yes, that's a good question. Because in one of the companies, the first company we worked with, it was a holding that initially had 2 businesses, and then 3. Well, the third one, which we, as the board, so to speak, launched together with you.
Okay, so how many companies are you currently on the board of, either as a board member or as the chair?
Right now, I'm the chair of the supervisory board at one Ukrainian company and the chair of the advisory board at another Ukrainian company.
From your experience with private companies, were those supervisory boards or advisory boards?
Everything starts with advisory boards because it's easier for the owner to grasp. Of course, very quickly the board would evolve, exactly. The advisory board turns into something in between an advisory and a supervisory board. As we say, it's a kind of transitional board, when the advisory board starts to gain additional powers, and the owner observes how people work, and he delegates his authority to this advisory board, which becomes an advisory board plus, or a supervisory board minus, however you want to put it.
By the way, this is actually a very interesting tool, and Dmytro and I, if he doesn't mind, will make a separate piece on this topic. And of course, most likely these boards were organized at the owner's discretion, not due to legal requirements or due to investors or creditors. In other words, the owner himself saw added value in this and created it.
All the boards were created at the request of the owners. That's true, it wasn't something the investors asked for. Well, of course, we're talking about private companies, so, well, that's not the case now. Legal requirements for private companies regarding the creation of boards. Well, what's interesting here is that, essentially, in most cases, when the owner had the desire to create a board, you and I say that the creation of a board can come from a place of passion or from the pursuit of a certain goal. That's one motivation. And another is to solve a particular problem. That is, I want to create a board because I want to resolve some issues with my partners or something else. And at the beginning, I don't have overall statistics, but based on our experience, my experience, it all starts with the owner becoming interested in this tool as a way to solve certain problems. And then over time, sometimes quickly, sometimes a bit more slowly, he realizes that this is a board. It's a tool for creating added value and developing the company. And more than that, a board is a tool for achieving strategic goal.
Well, probably at the start of working with the brother companies, there were some challenges that you and your colleagues had to overcome. Or there were situations where it was necessary to make some difficult or unpopular decisions.
I'll share a few interesting stories about the challenges we faced. Why do I say we? Because it was a company where Sergiy and I served on the board together. And the first challenge was the pandemic. That was a global challenge. One of the businesses in the company we worked for, the holding where we were on the board, was involved in the mice industry. Meetings, conferences, and everything related to that. And of course, when the pandemic hit the whole world like that, yes, it's not just that it collapsed right away. It collapsed in such a way that the company's profits essentially plummeted. And for us, as the board, the question arose, what can we do about it and what must we do? Because the board has a responsibility for the company's operations. That's first of all, on one hand. On the other hand, we understood that the financial component of the company at that moment did not allow for the board to be maintained. Everyone got paid, including me, to sustain the board. And we met there with the board members and we decided that fine, we would propose to the owner that we work without pay at that time until the performance indicators returned to previous levels. Because we believed in the company, we believed in the owners, we believed in the leadership of the departments. There was a very strong team, very good managers, and they were also co-owners. And then we had to develop a new strategy, taking the pandemic into account. With the closing of borders, the shutdown of travel and so on, the inability to meet in person, the shift to online, essentially because it was impossible to meet offline, as we remember. And it worked, the business recovered. And by the way, I remember that the year we finished, we ended up better than previous year. The financial indicators were better than the year without the pandemic.
If we talk about challenging situations that arise due to internal issues, for example, communication between the board and top management, communication between top management and the owners.
In many cases, when an owner decides to create a board, if he is the sole owner and has executives, a department head or a CEO, or if there are several owners, then the creation of a board will cause concern. Primarily, this concern arises among the management, because, well, they may feel that this could potentially take away their job. And clearly it's not, unfortunately. We don't have a very widespread understanding of what boards are, why they exist, how they function, and so on. That's why it's very important that at the beginning of the process there is established communication between the board, between board members, the chair of the board, the owner, and between board members and the company's management in order to explain, first of all, why the board was created and what its goals are. And by the way, we always, I repeat always, outline the board's goals for the coming years, and it's very important to communicate them both to the owner and to the company's management so that we also understand what to expect and where we're heading, because, well, we understand the board sets this strategic direction of the company's development, of course. Ideally, all employees should know and understand it, because if they do, they are more engaged. In this process, they are more motivated and work more efficiently.
How often does it happen that the expertise or professional level of top management falls short of the level that is needed, that must be in place in order to move toward the strategic goal set by the owner? What happens in that case?
Yes, that does happen. It's neither good nor bad. It's a normal situation. Here, it really depends further on not the competence of the manager, but their flexibility and ability to acquire new knowledge. Because, of course, the company had been operating in a certain rhythm, in a certain mode, and then the board came in. Strategic goals were defined. They are ambitious, they are long-term, and naturally, the company has to restructure itself, including its leadership. And if the leaders understand this, and this also depends on communication, on quality communication between the board and the management, if they understand it, if they, how to put it, understand what they are lacking, well, the board will always help to acquire that knowledge rather than take away competencies. Of course, there can be situations when a leader, a direction, when the current company leader is operating at their maximum, and we understand that they won't be able to handle it, achieving strategic goals, or for other reasons, lack of knowledge, experience, some soft skills and so on. Well, then you have to think about what to do with that. Well, for example, the first more radical option is a change, looking for a new CEO. And the second one, an interesting one, you and I use this in a board. It's an interim CEO, a temporary CEO. This is a person who for a certain period helps, more actively supports the current leader in order to grow and get to the necessary level so that the company can achieve its strategic goals.
Essentially, it's a coaching function.
He's kind of a coach, yes, but more of a mentor coach with the experience that the current leader lacks on the existing manager.
What do you think? Boards, they are beneficial for the company, and many owners agree with that. But they ask the question, okay, we understand why boards, or, by the way, advisory boards useful, but are there cases when boards of directors or advisor councils can actually harm the business?
Well, that can happen if from the very beginning, first of all, the competencies of the board members were defined incorrectly, and people came in with those competencies, or, for example, for one reason or another. The owner wanted to have stars, only stars on their board. And we all need to understand that the board is a single organism. The board operates as a unified body. Yes, board members may have different opinions, but still. The decision we make as a board is the board's decision. It is our joint decision, a shared one. So, if you have a group of stars who talk more about themselves than about anything else, then it won't work. The board won't function as a single organism. It will be just a group of people, but more like a collection of consultants. But that's not a board. Well, that could be a second reason. Well, a third reason could be if some board members have conflicts of interest, or their behavior does not align with the interests of the company.
There is the IFC methodology, according to which, in order for the implementation of a board to be effective in business, the business must be at a certain stage of its development. This means there are stages in business development at which, according to the IFC, a board is not useful or not effective. How would you comment on that?
Interesting question. I don't know why I phrased it that way. Because it seems to me that, well, let's put it this way. At the startup stage, yes, a board is needed, and it can be effective. At the crisis stage, it is even more necessary to involve the board. And if there is a board, then the company, well, this is also backed by statistics, the company handles all crisis situations better. At the growth stage, a board is also needed to ensure that growth moves in the right direction toward the emergence of strategic goals. If it's at the final stage of selling the company or going public through an IPO, then a board is also needed. A board is needed to help make that happen. Yes, the board members may have different competencies, and at these stages there can be different competencies and the board members may change. It's not the same board that goes through every stage. There were different people involved. But I believe there's no stage in a business's development where a board wouldn't be needed or would be ineffective.
Even if we take the stage that comes before the startup. When a business owner or initiator has a business idea, the board can already be useful because it will help structure it properly and launch it, moving on to the next stage of development. It is believed that the board operates at the strategic level, including making strategic decisions or providing strategic advice to the owner, to the founder. How often in your experience was the board
involved in strategy development? In my experience, the board was always involved in developing the strategy. And why is that the case? Is it just theory? The board sets the strategy. The board defines strategic goals together with the owner. And then the company's management has to develop strategic initiatives that will help the company achieve its strategic goals. But in most Ukrainian companies probably don't have much experience, either among the management or the employees, to do this independently, first of all. That's the first point. And the second, which might be even more important, right? The board members have additional competencies and expertise that the company's management or the L1 level under management do not possess. And this can also bring in fresh ideas and a new perspective. And a third point, the company's management is involved in operational activities, and that somewhat narrows their perspective, both in terms of what's happening within the company and in terms of the broader industry view, for example. The board members don't have that kind of dependency because they are not involved at the operational level, so their perspective is somewhat broader. And this combination of professional expertise held by the management combined with the broader perspective and expertise present in the board produces the most effective result when the board works together with the management on developing strategic initiatives.
Are there any examples where the development of such a strategy significantly influenced the growth of the business or the direction of the business? For example, the owner had chosen one direction before the strategy was developed, and the strategy pushed both the owner and the company toward a different direction.
Yes, that happened in one of the companies at the strategy development stage. Together with the management and the owner, we all agreed that our path for growth was to expand beyond Ukraine. And then it became a kind of trigger. It didn't happen immediately, but the move beyond Ukraine and the focus on markets outside Ukraine was a strategic decision. And, by the way, going back to the question about challenges, that was also one of the challenges for the board, because when we made the decision that we needed to move beyond Ukraine, that the company had to expand beyond Ukraine and sell its services or its product. So then, as the board, we gathered, well, there was a meeting, and we made the decision that in order for a company that is expanding beyond Ukraine, different competencies are needed among the board members. And we concluded our board, or our collaboration as board members with
our tenure,
this company. But what's really nice is that even now the company is operating. It remained in Ukraine, but it also works abroad. And once a year we meet up with the owner and the management to review the results and see what has been achieved. It's very gratifying. We, as the board, did a very good job.
If everything is so interesting and beneficial for the owners and for the companies, then why is it that boards in private companies are still not very popular in Ukraine?
Well, I think there are several factors, but this is just my biased opinion. First, I think it could also be influenced by all the scandals that have occurred with boards in state-owned companies, because not everyone, or maybe the majority, still doesn't have a clear understanding of the difference between, by the way, the supervisory board, how it works, how you use this tool. So these scandals that have happened in Ukraine can influence, for example, the owners. That's the first point. Secondly, well, let's put it this way, the owner, and even if we're talking about an advisory board, like we mentioned at the very beginning, it still starts to gain influence. This advisory board gives advice. The owner may choose to use it or not, but very quickly, if the board works well, he realizes it, and this advisory board adds value, the owner grants it more authority. This is essentially the first step in creating a board. It's a few iterations of interviews with the owners in order to explain. The best thing for the owners is to go and study somewhere, like at UCJ or PACU, which also provide training. But if something didn't happen, it's that understanding, or the lack of understanding of what a board actually is. Like, how can I entrust something of mine? I mean, it's my child. I once gave birth to it. And I still can't imagine how I could give any authority to strangers. It's a matter of trust. And this barrier is very hard to break on an emotional and psychological level for owners.
Many people believe that a board of directors is something associated with state-owned companies or banks, and the owners of small or medium-sized businesses, or those slightly larger than medium, believe that this tool isn't suitable for their type of business. What needs to be done in order to convey these ideas to them and show how this tool can be beneficial for their business?
Well, first of all, it's about raising awareness of supervisory or advisory boards as a tool. And thanks to, for example, your channel or your publications and all the social media content you produce, I think it has a strong impact and really helps to convey the message or this information to potential clients. Because, first and foremost, I believe the board is most effective for private companies. The state has, firstly, more restrictions, legislation, politics, and so on, as we've already mentioned. But for private companies, in my view, from the perspective of a potential board member, it's a blue ocean. Because you're right, this is not yet widely implemented in Ukraine's business environment. But from what I see now, it seems to be gradually gaining momentum. And this awareness among owners is growing.
If we go back to your career, what would you highlight as the greatest achievement in your career related to boards, or perhaps an achievement as a board member?
Well, I would put it this way. Maybe you're drawing conclusions a bit too early, because I believe that everything is still ahead, including the main achievements. Still ahead. But I already touched on this a bit when you asked about challenges, like in one of the companies where we were together on the board, how the financial results for the pandemic year turned out better than the previous ones. I think that's a really impressive achievement. And when we switched to a free-of-charge model, that was more of a, it's not an achievement, but for me, it was a very ethical, very right decision. And it showed that all the board members were the right people in the right places. Because at that time, we made that decision unanimously. There were no arguments.
It is believed that a board member should work not for money, but for the benefit of the company. Money is an integral part. It will come on its own, but the benefit to the company comes first. And were there any mistakes or perhaps failures along the way?
There were, as expected, of course, naturally mistakes as a board in the process, as a governing board. In one of the companies, we, as such, we didn't replace the CEO for a very long time and believed that he could change, that he could be taught, and, well, time was lost. So here I believe that we, as the board, didn't do our job properly.
Dmytro, there are a lot of stereotypes among potential board members regarding working on boards of directors and this career path. What are the main stereotypes? Could you highlight and debunk them?
Well, if we're talking about Ukraine, about the market of Ukrainian private companies, well, no, this is the thing. I mean, I don't think you'll become a millionaire in this market. So I'm not sure if that stereotype about board members really applies here. Maybe indeed, if we read about large global companies, their board members can earn big money. Well, those are more traditional supervisory boards, more established, maybe conservative, that meet once a quarter and, make some decisions. But even that is changing now. I believe you had a few weeks ago a post about a study that is changing. The approach of the board's work, and the board is becoming more involved. It's now expected that the board should be more engaged in the business. And, for example, it's considered very beneficial when it comes to strategy development, when the board takes part in shaping the strategy.
What do you think about the career of a board member? What advantages does this career offer to a potential independent director?
Good question. Well, the first advantage is that you might have meetings at 11 p.m. and you might have meetings on Saturday or Sunday. Well, I'm joking, but that's the flip side of the coin. You have a flexible work schedule. You don't have a 9 to 6 schedule. I don't know about others, but it suits me and I really like it. But that's not the main thing. Well, first of all, yes, for potential board members, you communicate directly with the owner. If we're talking about Ukrainian companies in the SME format, for example, then usually these aren't very large companies. They don't have thousands of employees. So the organizational structure is flatter. And the decision made by the board, from the moment it's made to the moment it's implemented, when you see the result, very little time passes. You very quickly see how you're influencing the business, how it changes. And that's inspiring. It's very inspiring, really. And if you have contact with the board, with the leadership, then all this communication, everything you do, how the company moves in the right direction, it's truly inspiring. Well, it's definitely more motivating, more inspiring than the compensation you receive. Well, for me at least.
You're currently on 2 boards of directors as the chair of the board. Are you planning to join any additional boards?
Yes, I am.
And how many boards do you think would be enough, or when will that moment come? The saturation point? When will you be ready to consider new boards?
That's a very good question. Right now we're talking about, I'm the chair of 2 boards of Ukrainian companies. We meet once a month. There are a few mandatory meetings each month, board meetings as well as preparatory and follow-up sessions, and additional meetings that arise depending on the processes taking place within the company. This is how Ukrainian business operates, and for now it works this way in all the companies where I've worked. It's impossible, I would say, to reduce that. In other words, it's not possible to just show up once a quarter, listen, say yes, okay, the board approves it, and then you leave and sit down. Meaning once a quarter you spend 8 hours in a meeting. It doesn't work like that for us. So there's a kind of physical limit, which for me right now, at the moment, well, around 5, 6 at most. It all depends on the company's level, its level of structure, its level of systematization, because the more structured, the more systematic, the easier it is and the less time it requires.
Dmytro, we've now talked about both business owners and potential members of boards of directors. If we talk about business owners, what would you recommend to them before forming a board? Or perhaps to business owners who have already established boards?
Well, let's put it this way. Business owners who haven't yet created a board but know something about it or are interested in this tool. If they don't know anything about it, then most likely they won't be watching these videos. And in that case, we need to go out and find them. Other ways are needed to get this information across to them. And for those who are interested or already know something, well, as I've already said, it's very useful to go through training. There or elsewhere, we have 2 companies that provide this. Or meet with someone who can deliver such training for you in a more focused way. If you have such a person in your circle, you can invite them to have a conversation with you to explain what a board is, why these tools are needed, what the benefits are, and so on. And this process, when the owner's decision gradually crystallizes, well, it takes time, and everyone involved needs to understand that helps owners create boards.
Well, and probably in addition to the owner's readiness, the company and the top management also need to be ready for this.
It's more about communication. It's not so much about the company's readiness, but more about communication, because the owner, first and foremost, it's the owner who decides. Next comes the process of creating the board, finding board members, and then communication from the owner is very important. You talk to your CEO, and then, so that he could further communicate why he made this decision, the decision that we will have a board. The goals of the board are as follows: what I expect from them, from you, how it will work. He can explain that. And if not, then it's the responsibility of the board, its members or the chairperson, to establish that communication with the company's management, because I don't think it's possible otherwise. If it's a new board being established in the company, the management will always show some level of resistance, greater or lesser, misunderstandings, miscommunications, and so on. And that needs to be communicated and explained.
All right, for example, the owner has a strategic goal that they want to set for the company. For example, either on his own or with someone's help. He has decided on the composition of the board. Where can such people be found?
Well, first of all, the person who is helping to create the board usually has their own contacts and can recommend someone. That's the first thing. Second, going back to those 2 organizations that provide training, the first and the second, PACU and UCGA, they have their own registries of graduates, the people who have completed this training. They've completed the training, and both organizations have databases where you can also search.
Besides composition, many people say there should be chemistry between the owners of the board and the board members. What does that mean?
Well, okay, let me break it down. If we're talking about the owner and the board, the most important thing is building trust. Of course, if an owner approaches someone with a request to create a board, it means they know this person better and already trust them. If this person also joins the board and selects other members, then there is already some level of trust at the very least between the owner and this person. And then over time, yes, that level of trust develops if the board functions well and effectively between the owner and the board. And the second point is chemistry. It's the chemistry among the board members. As I've already mentioned, the board operates as a single organism. That doesn't mean all board members have to share the same opinion. No. But yes, everyone must be able to listen. And accept what exactly? Well, even if you didn't reach a compromise and a question was put to a vote and your opinion didn't prevail, you as a board member must accept it because it is also your decision. The board made that decision. That's why chemistry is very important. For the board members, so that the board functions as a single organism. I've already mentioned stars, but it doesn't have to be just stars. If there's no chemistry, then you'll just have a group of 3, 5, or 7 consultants, but that won't be a board.
So how can that be achieved? Everyone on the board comes with their own experience, with their typical behavior, and probably it's very difficult to achieve that kind of chemistry or the possibility of effective collaboration.
It's not easy. But earlier you asked whether my professional background as a manager helped or not. I said that it helps, but there is another side of the coin. And this applies to all managers. When they start, they switch from being a manager to being a board member. It depends on the person, of course, but for some time, even on the board, they still act like managers. That is, as a manager, you are used to having subordinates. And this really stands out. But if a person is smart and understands that this is all, it's neither good nor bad, it happens to everyone.
It's natural. It's a
natural distortion, but it's not a clinical one. It can be corrected very quickly if you understand that in the board, different leadership competencies are required. You are one of the members of the board. Even the head of the board has additional authorities, but he's not your boss. And the opinion of each board member is very important. And this restructuring, this rebuilding, it takes some time. And if this restructuring hasn't happened, then it will cause problems in the board because the board won't function as a unified mechanism.
From time to time, CEOs of various companies reach out to me asking how useful their experience might be for boards. For example, the company operates in a rather unique field. And of course, that kind of experience is unlikely to be widely applicable among boards of directors. But on the other hand, such people usually have an understanding of systematization, strategy, and other things that could potentially be useful for the board. What do you think? Can any CEO of a large company potentially consider serving on boards of directors as a next step in their career?
Yes, I would say that any executive and any top manager of any company can plan and look in that direction if they are interested in it, if they are confident that they can reinvent themselves. It's good that they still have some. In addition to strategy, financial disciplines and so on, people management and operational cases. A narrow professional specialization is good. You can be helpful in certain situations, but from my point of view, well, let's put it this way. No one is born a board member, and there's no such thing as an MBA for being a board member. As of today, all the people who serve on boards come from either business or politics if we're talking about state-owned companies. Companies that are more politically connected to the state, for example. So yes, everyone.
What would you advise such people? What steps should they take to start, to go through the whole journey?
Well, first you can read, you can figure out for yourself whether this is something you'd be interested in, because it might not always be interesting for everyone. As I said, it's kind of, you're almost working 24/7, well, okay, not literally 24/7, but still from 9 to 12 and until midnight. I mean, that's what a day looks like, and not everyone might like that. The total compensation level, for example, might be a bit lower than what CEO has in his position. If that's very important to him, we've already talked about this, then probably a role on the board of directors isn't for him either. But if you've read up on it, you're interested and you understand all the hidden pitfalls, then you need to go studying. In Ukraine, there are, so to speak, we've already mentioned them, 2 companies that offer such training. There are also other business schools abroad that provide this kind of education.
Dmytro, what trends do you see right now? In boards of directors, there's the old approach, more associated with the idea that the main role of the board of directors is oversight. There's a more modern approach, more project-oriented, an approach where the role of the board of directors is first and foremost development. What trends do you see in this market right now?
in my opinion, and based on the publications and research you've shared, so in my opinion, that's very good. The modern trend is greater involvement of the board of directors in the creation of tone, in setting the tone, in the development of the company, not just oversight and control, but also participation in creation, involvement in strategy development. It may not be classical, it differs from the classical approach that you and I studied, but this is something that, first of all, I can say that it works effectively, and without it, it's very difficult. You can distance yourself, but then, well, I would say that if we're talking about companies, say small global companies, then it would be almost ineffective. The board won't be very effective if it operates like a classical supervisory board from, I don't know, 70s, 80s and 90s. The 90s or 2000s, that's why this trend exists. I mean, well, in the boards where you and I have served, that's exactly how we've always worked. And we've already said, remember, that this balance needs to be maintained in order to truly ensure non-involvement, for example, in operational activities, which should not be done. But you and I have seen the results in this involvement in strategic development. In a company, it is more effective than just a supervisory role, like that of a board.
Yes, and considering that this is a blue ocean, potential board members can absolutely expect that there is an opportunity to build a career in this direction.
Yes. It really is a blue ocean. Small and medium-sized businesses in Ukraine generate it. If I remember correctly, these are figures from 2022, something close to 80% of GDP, something like 70%. And it seems to me that based on some results, we're second to China. In terms of that, it really is a blue ocean.
All right. And how is the current situation related to the war, with the challenges that are now? This war brings, among other things, problems related to personnel, financial issues that many companies are currently facing, market challenges, and so on. To what extent can boards be helpful in such a situation?
War is a crisis, one type of crisis. It may be more brutal and so on, but it is still a crisis. And as I've already said, during a crisis, the board becomes even more effective to support companies, to prevent them from going bankrupt or shutting down. It's not just about some business decisions. There's also a very significant role involved. Boards play a crucial role in providing emotional support to the owner, in making decisions together with the owner. We understand that during a crisis, whether it's the scale of war or even a pandemic, but war has pushed this even further. When owners for a while decide that this is a major crisis and say, I'll manage the company on my own, I'm sidelining the board, I'm in charge now, and so on. They even sideline the CEO and take everything into their own hands. In my opinion, that's not a very effective decision. What does owner involvement really mean? No one sees the full picture from above. This is an emotional decision, first and foremost, an impulsive decision. They don't always, to put it mildly, lead to success.
In reality, the owner is abroad and trying to manage an operational business in Ukraine from there.
Yes, in my opinion, that doesn't work at all. You live in different realities. That's why the board, during a crisis, now during the war, we see many examples where the board has been very successful in helping the business to stay balanced. And we have such an example of one of the companies where we also, together with you, are now slowly, step by step, restoring profit.
At the beginning of the invasion, indeed, some owners shut down their boards and they removed hired CEOs from operational activities and started managing the business themselves. Some of them later returned to normal management, including reinstating the board of directors. Some still continue to work now as both owner and CEO. On the other hand, there are other examples where I now see a wave of requests from business owners who want to establish a board. Most likely, this situation is related to the war. It additionally pushed them toward understanding the need for a board. But indeed, there are two such waves. One wave is when, at the beginning, owners took all the authority into their own hands. And the other wave is the current one, a wave of board of directors being established in private companies. What do you think? Which wave will ultimately prevail? Which wave will be stronger? And what will be the future trend in the creation of these boards?
I would really like to believe, and I truly do believe, not just hope, but I believe that this second wave, which is just beginning, where owners are the ones initiating the creation of boards, that this wave will prevail. Why do I believe this? Why do I think that this is... Well, first of all, it's good for the companies, for those companies whose owners are moving in this direction. It's good for the country. The more such companies there are, the more successful, systematic and structured companies we have, the better it will be for Ukraine, for Ukraine's economy. And the stronger we will become, the economy will, well, if no one interferes with us, the economy will become stronger. And we as citizens of Ukraine, all of us, not just the owners, but also those who work, will only benefit from this, because there will be more money in the economy to build such a strong and unified country. Not just so that we are strong economically, but also militarily, so that we have enough weapons, well, and so on. So yes, it really does have an impact. This movement or this trend will affect everyone, the entire country.
Dmytro, thank you for the conversation. Thank you for your thoughts and advice. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Until next time on the Board of Directors channel with Sergiy Bulavin,